So, what do you really know about the Montreal Maroons? Probably not a lot, and that's no surprise. These days, they've faded into the shadows of history. But back in the 20s and 30s, the Maroons weren't just another team in the National Hockey League, they were a force to be reckoned with. From 24 to 38, the Montreal Maroons shared the city with their famous rivals, the Canadiens. While the Canadiens have gone on to become a hockey dynasty, the Maroons carved out their own legacy, winning 2 Stanley Cups and assembling a roster that included some of the greatest players of their era. Despite all that, their story has been largely overshadowed by their more celebrated crosstown competitors. In this video, we're going to change that. We'll dive into the history of the Maroons, explore the significance of their short-lived yet remarkable franchise, and uncover why they deserve a spot in the spotlight of hockey history. From their thrilling victories to the challenges they faced during the Great Depression, this is the story of the Montreal Maroons, the NHL's forgotten champions. The Montreal Maroons came to life in 1924, right in the middle of a hockey-obsessed city. The Montreal Canadiens had already been around for over a decade, dominating the local scene and serving as a symbol of pride for the city's French-speaking community. But Montreal was split between the Francophones and the Anglophones, and the Maroons were created to represent the English-speaking population. It was a bold move, giving the city not just 1 but 2 NHL teams, something that hadn't been since the Montreal Wanderers folded in 1918. The Maroons weren't just any new team. They were one of the first official expansion teams in the NHL. The league had big plans for growth, and adding a second team in hockey's biggest market seemed like a no-brainer. The Maroons were backed by Montreal's well-heeled Anglophone elite, who spared no expense in building the state-of-the-art Montreal Forum as their home arena. But from the start, the Maroons faced challenges. Competing directly with the Canadiens for fans, resources, and attention wasn't easy, and their arrival only intensified the cultural divide that shaped the city's identity. In Montreal, hockey wasn't just a sport, it was a reflection of its people. The Canadiens embodied the pride and aspirations of the French-speaking majority, while the Maroons became a rallying point for the city's English-speaking minority. This duality created one of the most fascinating rivalries in NHL history, as the teams battled for supremacy both on and off the ice. The Maroons had a lot to prove, and their journey to carve out their place in Montreal's hockey scene was only just the beginning. The Montreal Maroons wasted little time in making their mark in the NHL. In just their second season, they stunned the hockey world by winning their first Stanley Cup in 1926. Led by rookie sensation Nels Old Poison Stewart, who scored 6 of the team's 10 goals in the finals, the Maroons defeated the Victoria Cougars, marking the last time an NHL team faced an opponent from another league for the championship. Stewart's incredible season earned him the Hart Trophy as the league's most valuable player, and his powerful shot and physical play set the tone for the Maroons' gritty, determined style. That 26th Cup was a triumph not just for the team, but for the Anglophone supporters, who now had a championship to rival the Canadiens' legacy. By the 1930s, the Maroons had established themselves as one of the league's top teams, fielding a roster full of future Hall of Famers. While Howie Morenz is most often associated with the Canadiens, he briefly donned the Maroon sweater, adding star power and elevating the team's play during his time with the club. The Maroons' second Stanley Cup win came in 1935 under the guidance of coach Tommy Gorman, who had famously won the championship with Chicago the year before. The Maroons swept the Toronto Maple Leafs in the finals, a dominant performance that left no doubt about their place among hockey's elite. Gorman himself declared the 1935 Maroons the greatest team that ever stepped on the ice. These victories cemented the Maroons' reputation as one of the NHL's powerhouse franchises in the early years. Iconic moments like their hard-fought playoff series against teams like Ottawa and Toronto showcased their ability to perform under pressure. For a brief but glorious time, the Maroons weren't just competing with the Canadiens, they were standing shoulder to shoulder with them as champions of the hockey world. The 1930s marked the golden era of the Montreal Maroons, a time when they stood as one of the NHL's strongest teams and gave their crosstown rivals, the Canadiens, a run for their money. The rivalry between the Maroons and the Canadiens wasn't just about hockey, it was a clash of cultures. When the teams met at the Montreal Forum, the air was electric, with the stands divided among linguistic and cultural lines. Anglophone fans cheered for the Maroons, while Francophone supporters passionately backed the Canadiens. Games between the two often turned into intense physical battles, both on the ice and sometimes in the crowd. The Maroons reached their peak during the early to mid-1930s, consistently challenging for the Stanley Cup. Their second championship in '35 showcased their dominance as they powered through the playoffs, defeating teams like the Chicago Blackhawks and the Toronto Maple Leafs with a mix of airtight defense and high-scoring offense. The team was led by stars like Hooley Smith, Nels Stewart, and Babe Siebert, who formed one of the most fearsome lines of the era. The rivalry with the Canadiens fueled their competitive fire as each team fought not just for trophies, but for the pride of their respective communities. Their success solidified the Maroons' place as a powerhouse of the league. While the Canadiens had a longer history, the Maroons proved they were more than capable of going toe-to-toe with their neighbors. Their victories and the intensity of their rivalry with the Canadiens brought Montreal to the center of the hockey universe. The city became the epicenter of the NHL, with the Maroons and the Canadiens offering fans a spectacle unmatched anywhere else in the league. For a time, it seemed like the Maroons were destined to become just as legendary as their crosstown counterparts. However, despite their success on the ice, the Montreal Maroons couldn't escape the economic realities of the Great Depression. By the mid-1930s, the once booming ticket sales at the Forum began to dwindle, and the team's Anglophone fan base proved too small to sustain them. While the Canadiens benefited from the growing French-speaking middle class, the Maroons struggled to fill seats, finishing with the league's worst attendance for 3 consecutive seasons. The financial pressures became impossible to ignore, forcing the Maroons to sell off key players like Hooley Smith and Nels Stewart, which only hastened their decline. The team's final years were marked by struggles both on and off the ice. Injuries, player departures, and lackluster performances defined their last seasons. In 1936, the Maroons were part of one of hockey's most iconic moments, the longest playoff game in NHL history, a grueling 6-overtime loss to the Detroit Red Wings. Though historic, that defeat was a sign of the team's dwindling fortunes. By the 37-38 season, rumors swirled that the Maroons might relocate to another city, but nothing materialized. After a dismal campaign, the franchise suspended operations, and by 1947, their NHL rights were officially revoked. The dissolution of the Maroons left the Canadiens as the sole NHL franchise in Montreal, paving the way for their eventual dominance. With no local competition, the Canadiens became the undisputed hockey representatives of the city, growing their fan base and legacy over the decades. Meanwhile, the Maroons faded into memory, their achievements overshadowed by the Canadiens' rise to legendary status. The Maroons' downfall was a somber end to what had once been a proud and competitive franchise, a victim of economic forces and the shifting cultural landscape of Montreal. The legacy of the Montreal Maroons, though often overshadowed, remains an important chapter in hockey history. Winning 2 Stanley Cups in just 14 years, they were a powerhouse of the NHL's early days and a key player in establishing Montreal as the epicenter of professional hockey. Their rivalry with the Canadiens helped shape the city's hockey culture, adding a unique duality that made every game at the Forum an event. The Maroons also left an indelible mark on the league, with Hall of Famers like Nels Stewart and Hooley Smith setting benchmarks for future generations. Their 1935 Stanley Cup win, achieved without a single playoff loss, stood as a record for nearly 2 decades. While their memory has faded over time, the NHL has made efforts to preserve their story. The legacy of Howie Morenz, who briefly played for the Maroons, was honored with the retirement of his number by the Canadiens, a gesture that acknowledged both teams' shared role in Montreal's hockey history. But is that enough? The Maroons were the first NHL team to win 2 Stanley Cups in such a short span, a feat that deserves more recognition. Their story is a reminder of the league's humble beginnings and the franchises that paved the way for today's NHL. Perhaps it's time to shine a brighter light on the Maroons, ensuring their contributions to the game aren't lost to history. The story of the Montreal Maroons is one of incredible highs and heartbreaking lows. From their early success in the 20s and 30s, including 2 Stanley Cup wins, to their eventual downfall during the Great Depression, the Maroons played a pivotal role in shaping the NHL's early years. Their fierce rivalry with the Canadiens, their star-studded lineup, and their legacy of tough, competitive hockey left a mark on the league. Yet despite all of that, the Maroons' story has been largely forgotten, overshadowed by the Canadiens' continued dominance in Montreal. But imagine for a moment, what if the Maroons had lasted longer? Could they have rivaled the Canadiens for NHL supremacy? It's a fascinating thought, and as we look back on their brief yet impactful history, It's clear that teams like the Maroons helped lay the foundation for the NHL we know today, and their story deserves to be remembered. Hey, if you enjoyed learning about the Maroons and their legacy, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more hockey content. And tell us what stories you have about the Maroons and let us know what you think about their impact on the game in the comments below. For now, take a moment and click on this video about the Utah Hockey Club and this one about NHL rivalries, and I'll see you in the next one.